So, good morning. How is everybody today? Good? Yeah. My name is Patty Jones. I teach journalism and mass communications here on campus, and I also advise the student newspaper, The Ebb Tide. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to the discussion on digital news media. I know it does not come as a shock to you that traditional media, say newspapers, magazines, and even radio and television, are undergoing fundamental change as more and more people turn to online sources for their news. These days we hear a lot about collapsing economic models in the news business, but not a whole lot about changing content models in the news business. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And we're going to look at three specific questions. Yeah. What are the key differences between digital news and traditional print models? That's one. Two, what are some of the challenges news media face when trying to succeed in an online world swamped by free news? And three, finally, where is today's fourth estate and traditional watchdog role played by news media? Yeah. Moderating today will be Jim Hills, who is with the Public Information Office on campus. And he's got two very special guests, both of whom graduated from Shoreline Community College, both of whom are working for online news organizations in Seattle. First up, over there, is Dan DeMay. And Dan DeMay actually had his first career in hanging sheetrock. No, sorry, drywall. Whatever, yeah, okay.
Terminology.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but one day you were driving to work and you thought, what the hell am I doing? Do I want to do this for the rest of my life? He turned the car around, yeah, and eventually landed at Shoreline Community College with the idea of becoming a reporter, eventually, yeah. He joined the Ebb Tide student newspaper, starting out as the distribution manager, went to copy editor, and finally the editor-in-chief, which means the boss of the whole organization. A very hard job. Yeah, and during his tenure, he won a General Excellence Award for the paper from the Washington Community College Journalism Association. Yeah. He went on to Washington University, where he also worked on the student newspaper and served as an intern for the Skagit Valley Herald as a legislative reporter in Olympia. Yeah. The Herald liked him so much, liked his work so much, that they offered him a job upon graduation, and he became the political government reporter for them, doing great work. On very meaty topics, things like water rights and mental health. But Dan doesn't sit in one place very long, and he ended up going to Bozeman, the daily paper in Bozeman, Montana, before finally landing where he is now at the SeattlePI.com, where he covers business, transportation, and culture. Please join me in welcoming Dan. Yay! The other guest is Jimmy Lovaas. Yeah, and when Jimmy arrived at SCC, he already lived several lives working as a poker dealer, a bouncer, and a flight attendant. What am I missing, Jimmy? Anything? Lots.
We need a whole other hour for that.
Okay, all right, we'll move on. Unlike Dan, Jimmy had no intention of becoming a journalist when he landed at the Ebb Tide student newspaper in 2010. But he distinguished himself with really stylish writing and became the arts and entertainment editor and eventually caught the journalism bug. From SCC, Jimmy went on to the UW journalism program, taking photos and working as the crime reporter for the UW Daily. Yeah. He interned for both the McClatchy newspapers and the Seattle Times. Upon graduation in 2013, is that right? 14? Yeah. Jimmy freelanced for a range of news outlets, including Reuters News Service and The Stranger, before landing where he is today at NBC-owned BreakingNews.com. So please join me in welcoming Jimmy. So the format today is like this. The The panel will talk for about 30 minutes, then they'll open the room for questions and answers. You can raise your hand and ask questions, or there's also a card with the program like this, if you're a little shy, yeah? And write down the question here, and it will be collected and asked, yeah? And now, present to you, Dan, Jimmy, and Jim.
Thank you. Thanks, Patty. So we actually have 3 graduates up here because I'm also a graduate of Shoreline Community College decades ago. And it was an English instructor here named Carol Doig who husband is probably more famous. Her husband's name is Ivan Doig. He recently passed away. And Carol set me on my path to the University of Washington, and ultimately my first job was at the Seattle Times. I worked for several other newspapers. Just before coming back to Shoreline Community College in 2008, I was editor-publisher of a group of weekly newspapers called the Enterprise Newspapers, owned by the Herald in Everett, and had done that for 12 or 13 years before coming here. So you actually have 3 grads, all starting their careers here at Shoreline, so it was really fun. I wanted to get started with these 2 guys, though. This is about their perspective. And the first piece that we talked about was digital versus print, traditional versus today. What are the differences there? How are we seeing that? And I think we want to have the opportunity for both Dan and Jimmy to drill down on that a little bit. It's not necessarily a one versus the other because there are nuances to both. And there are viabilities to both that are happening right now in the market. So let's start with you, Dan, and we'll talk about key differences. Start with digital versus print, and then if you want to drill down on that some, that'd be great.
Okay, well, one of the things I should probably preface this with is that a lot of print publications that still exist have a huge digital presence. So taking into account that they might be doing things differently. So working for SeattlePI.com, we are online only and have been since 2009. We're the only Hearst property in the United States that is digital only. So newspapers like the San Francisco Chronicle, the Houston Chronicle, the San Antonio News Express, and a few others are also owned by Hearst, and they have a digital presence and a print presence. And what I find is that those 2 sides operate independently in most of those newsrooms. So the big differences that I sort of jotted down quickly are, in a print product, you have a limited amount of space. It costs money to print a newspaper. So you say, this is how much space we have, and this is what we're going to do. When you do it online, you have virtually unlimited space, but then you have the issue of whether or not people are reading that. So that sort of becomes a weighing factor, like, should we write a really long story just because we have room to run it, or should we write it short so that people read the whole thing? Having that space online, though, allows you to do things that you can't do in a print paper. In print papers, often you might run one photo, and that's all the room you have. So photo essays have kind of gone by the wayside, which is discouraging to most photo editors in print newsrooms. I worked in 2 print newsrooms, and I don't think we ever ran a photo essay. A couple times I saw maybe 3 photos run. So that's something where in a digital platform, you have unlimited space to do that. You can run 30 photos of an event or 50, and we often do at the PI. We'll run galleries that I frequently don't put up a gallery that's less than 25 photos. Often they could be 75 photos, could be 100 if you want it to be. So you have unlimited room to do that. You can include video with your package. You can include interactive web graphics that readers can click on and kind of see how the numbers make sense for them if it's a numbers heavy story. So that space sort of gives you that platform to do a lot more things and interact with the reader in a number of different ways. One of the things that I see as very different between what we do as an online-only presence and a small staff, a staff of about 12, versus what a paper like the Seattle Times does, is that the Times covers everything. And by everything, I mean every city council meetings, community meetings, whatever it might be. They get out there, they have somebody to send out, or an intern, or 5 reporters on one beat, whatever it might be. They get people out there. Maybe not 5. Patty's wincing at that, but I know that they have more than one reporter on several beats. So we don't do that at all. We say, okay, this is the thing that our readers are going to care about, or that's going to be important to them. So we're going to grab that and we're going to skip the rest. As Patty mentioned introducing me, I have 3 beats: transportation, business, and Seattle culture. At the Seattle Times, you have a transportation reporter who's been there for, God, I don't know, 20 years, Mike Lindblom. Probably, and other people who pick up transportation stories here and there. You have multiple variances of business reporters there, and you have people who cover culture and the arts as independent sections. So I do all of that, so I can't do everything that they do. So that's one of the things. You have a little bit of give and take. You usually have smaller organization, and you have to give up some of that.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
You talked about, just said that it's about, you try to determine what people are going to be interested in and then give them that. So how do you do that in the online environment?
Well, so, and I kind of want to put the caveat that it's not just what people are interested in, but also what is going to affect people's lives. So sometimes you give people what they want, which is your fun, entertaining story. Sometimes you give people what they need, which is your, the budget of the city is being slashed and you're not going to have any garbage service anymore, or whatever it might be. Tracking those things in an online world is through traffic. I mean, you measure page views, you measure time on site, engagement time, you measure things like click-through rate, unique visitors, and so we say, okay, stories about this topic do really well, people seem to like that, so remember we should get to that. Stories about this maybe they do a lot of unique visitors, but they don't do a lot of return visitors, so you want to get to that because that gets a lot of people interested.
How often do you see those numbers? When you come onto a shift, are you seeing those numbers for the previous 24 hours, previous week? Do you look at it every month? I mean, how impacted are you by those numbers?
I use 3 different, everyone in our newsroom uses 3 different pieces of software to track analytics. So we use a software called Chartbeat, we use something called Omniture, an Adobe product, and we also use Google Analytics. I'm looking at them all day. Chartbeat has a heads-up display on our homepage. I can see how many people are clicking on a story in real time.
So all the time?
All the time.
That's amazing to me.
Actually, should chime in there.
Yeah. So I want to give you a chance to talk about this also. Yeah.
I got to remember that point so I can come back.
I'll get it. I'll make sure.
Okay.
So you want to start again? So
the differences, the
Yeah.
key differences between. I work for BreakingNews.com, which is a mobile news app, and we also run a website, a Twitter feed, social media, and whatnot. And we're kind of set up a little bit differently. Dan's actually doing original reporting, so he's going out and finding the story, writing about it, posting it online, and gets distributed to people that way. What we do, and what I do as an editor, is I'm watching for him to write something, and then if it's breaking, because we're breaking news, I can't talk about stuff that's old, then I'm going to grab that and push it out. So we're an aggregator. There's a lot of editorial decisions that go in there because we're having to decide what do I choose, why am I choosing this, who's our audience for. But that's why I think the difference between traditional and digital media is really just in delivery. It's not so much in the news gathering process and deciding what's important. The difference is delivery, and because it's delivered digitally, you have a lot of tools like you just talked about that you can use to, I guess, decide on what people are looking at. Not decide on what's what I'm looking for. Anyway, figure out. Well, I'm trying to figure out what you're looking at. The way I do that is using through tools.
be an editor.
Yeah, we're being an editor. And we use different tools than what Dan does, and I don't want to bore you with which tools we use to look at, but it's the same thing. We're looking at trying to find out who's looking at what, who's following a topic. Like on our app, you can actually, it's called following, but you can tell us that you're interested in this particular story, and we set a push alert to your phone when something's happening on that story. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. So I want to ask you a little bit about how you see your role. So you talked about being an aggregator, and aggregator is becoming a pretty common label on a lot of websites, that they don't originate any content, they gather content and then they repackage it. From my experience, I would say that, and I'll go back, a ways, and even though AP is Associated Press is still an aggregator of content. In the old days, print, AP was the aggregator. It was getting everybody else, and then it was coming to the print product, and then the print product was picking and choosing which was going forward. Now, everybody's an aggregator to some degree. How do you differentiate yourself here at Breaking News?
Well, what we do is, rather than trying to, it's a real hard sell to tell somebody how you're different as an aggregator if all you're doing is aggregating news, because, okay, if you're aggregating and this guy's aggregating, tell me what's the difference. So what we focus on and why we're successful is the speed at which we do it. So, for example, in 2015, major news alerts. So does anybody in here, I assume people in here have some sort of news app on your phone, and that, when it tells you, like, you want to get a push notice, it'll show up on your screen and tell you this story. So all the news apps do that same thing. Last year, of all the major English language news apps, say a big story's happening, so like the random shooting or something, mass shooting, they'll send out an alert. That's cool. We send out an alert. That's cool. There's no difference between the two. The difference is that we averaged 14 minutes faster than everybody else did last year. So the next fastest app was well behind us. And the way we do that is they pay people like me, who, I don't know if we have OCD or what, or just like obsess about the news, but we're scouring it. So as soon as we see something, I'm writing something up and I'm posting it out and pushing it to your phone. So we're just faster. And that's how we differentiate ourselves. The other brands that are doing it are trying to differentiate themselves by, I don't want to say flashier presentation, but like BuzzFeed, if anybody here has a BuzzFeed news app, it's a really slick presentation. It's a nice looking app. New York Times is trying to do the same thing, and they're differentiating themselves with a really prestigious brand name. I mean, it's the New York Times. It's the paper of record. So that's how they differentiate themselves. When it comes down to smaller aggregators and like up-and-comers like us, you have to find something that somebody else isn't doing, which is really every other business does the same thing. If you're going to open a restaurant, you have to do something better than the restaurant next door, and nobody's going to buy your food. You're going to be an aggregator, you have to differentiate yourself from somebody else, and it's just market choice. Do you want to do it by being faster? That works. You want to be, BuzzFeed's working, they're growing, so you make it flashier and people will get on board with that. But there's got to be something different. And that, I think, is different than newspapers, because the cost of entry into the business is a lot different on digital media than it is in print. Seattle Times doesn't really have to be too concerned about that, because who in their right mind is going to open up in Seattle and be like, I'm going to start a major Seattle newspaper? Like, nobody would do that. You'd be out of your mind. So it kind of puts more of a business-centric focus on digital than there is in.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things that is very different about working in a digital environment versus a print environment is that when I worked on a print newspaper, I basically had only little snippets of what the business side of things were. Like, I had a sense of if our corporate publishing company was doing okay or not, but I didn't really know. And we saw like pickup numbers of our newspapers every week, like how many people would pick up a copy, and we sort of had, we had our subscriber numbers, but I didn't really have to worry about that. Like on a day-to-day basis, I was thinking about, getting my stories, getting them done, packaging them, doing my job as a reporter. Now, I'm thinking about doing all the things I do as a reporter, plus how can I get more eyes on the page? How do I get people to read this? And so I'm thinking about traffic, and I'm thinking about, what can I do to drive people to my stories and thus drive them to our website to make sure that they click on the pages that ads pop up on, and thus monetize our business. Because the bottom line is, if people don't come look at our stories, then I don't get paid, or I lose my job. I mean,
one or the other.
I don't get paid by how many clicks I get, but if
Wouldn't that be
traffic
awesome?
goes down, no, it wouldn't be.
No, okay.
if traffic goes down, I could, we could be out of business, and I could be living in a box under I-5 as.
So let me ask that question for both of you in
Professor
a little different way, because both of you are talking about the immediacy. And we're talking about the difference between traditional print or radio or TV to some degree, and the environments that you're both working in now, about the idea of the news cycle. And that in the print world, in a traditional way, there was a news cycle because the paper only got printed once a day, and it took a long time to get that thing going. And there was a cycle, there was a rhythm to news. How do you guys view news cycle now? Is there any rhythm, or is it
No, I
just
think there still is a rhythm.
fire hose?
I would say the rhythm, though, is not, and again, we cover breaking news, so that's, and
Well.
when I'm strung for Reuters, that's what I covered for them, too. There's still a rhythm. For example, when I come into work, if I'm going to work, I work a swing shift tonight, I'm not likely going to find any big breaking political stories that are U.S. politics, because 3 o'clock in the afternoon is 6 on the East Coast, and everybody in D.C. is packing up and going home. So unless somebody's going to drop some sort of scandal story at 9 o'clock at night Eastern or something like that, it's probably not going to show up on my radar, versus first thing in the morning, that's when all the writers in DC are pumping those out. So in that way, for big governmental stories, there's still a news cycle. Like scandal stories and that kind of stuff, they leak out, and instead of waiting till the next day to push out the story, they can do it right away. And I think the difference isn't so much that they wanted to do that before, they just couldn't. I mean, you had to wait, scandal story breaks out in Seattle, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the paper's already out, I guess it's going in tomorrow. Right. They would have loved to get it out right there, they just couldn't. So now that there's technology's changed, they put it out there. But that's why I think, like, for the news cycle hasn't really gone away. It's just the immediacy of you seeing it.
A little bit.
It's changed a little bit there.
How do you guys view it?
Well, I think you also have to consider TV news, which has been around for a long time. And TV news has always had the opportunity in a big breaking news story to break into TV. So in theory, TV news could do some of the things that we do with online news, but it just might have had to rise to a higher level. But if something happened at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you can bet it's going to be on the nightly news. Yeah. So.
Well, the other thing, like CNN, for example, everybody thinks of the creation of the 24-hour news cycle starting with big, 24-hour cable TV or cable news channels. But it's sort of, I don't know, has anyone turned on CNN lately? You might find a story on there and they're just running the same story. Nothing against them, I mean, they do a fine job and all that, but they might be running the same story all day long. So, like, if you're just joining us, here's what happened, and then wait for 15 minutes. If you're just joining us, here's what's happened. And they didn't tell you anything new, it's the same thing. So it sort of leaves you in the impression that it's like, it's a 24-hour news cycle, but they're still waiting, somebody's still in the background writing it, somebody's still preparing the package. It didn't just immediately jump from happening to on the TV set. Sometimes they don't even break in.
Well, I don't think 24-hour news cycle is a real thing, in that most people still go to bed at night and sleep. So a lot fewer things happen at night. I mean, you're going to have your crime stories that break in the middle of the night, and occasionally you're going to have some whatever scandal story or something. But what I think I find is that if I'm walking out the door at 6:30 at night, as I frequently do, and I get an email on my phone that says some breaking city news, or somebody dropped a press release or whatever it might be, I got to go back to my desk and I got to write a story and I got to get it out, and then I got to be ready to follow it up. And the same thing can happen on the weekend. It just doesn't. It doesn't wait for your shift. Yeah. Some things wait, like Jimmy said, political stories, government stories. Like if it's a government holiday, or if it's around the Christmas or New Year's, and I'm trying to get a hold of government officials, forget about it. I'm never going to get a story done because no one's in the office, no one's working. So there are parts of it that have become the always on, always, get it out as fast as you can whenever it happens, but then there are parts of it that remain stuck to, here's when people work and sleep and live their lives. So I think there's.
So I want to ask both of you on the digital side, we're talking about your sites primarily, right? Where does social media for your sites figure into your workload?
Well, look, for us, we, I don't know, maybe, I'm just guessing, I didn't actually count this up, but so I probably shouldn't guess, but maybe 5% of our stories or posts or news bits that we post on our website and our news app actually show up on our social media channel. So we kind of pick the bigger ones of the day because, for example, like, say there's a 4.3 earthquake in Oklahoma. That's an interesting enough story, and that's something we're going to put on our site and on our app. We're not going to push notifications to everybody because nobody in Seattle cares that there was a 4.3 in Oklahoma, but we're going to put it on the site. But we're not going to put that on Facebook because no one's going to read it. And we have 2.5 million Facebook followers, and we'll have a hell of a lot less if we start posting news that nobody cares about. So what we try to do is pick out the bigger stuff and things that we think have the most impact on people's lives and those types of stories. Or just big interest stories, for example, the Powerball thing. That really didn't have any impact on anybody's life, but everybody was interested in it. So we thought, well, that's a good social media candidate.
And
But
are you
if
doing
we-
that, sorry, are you doing that as part of your shift, part of your work?
Yeah, yeah. Which is the one, that is one big difference between, and Dan mentioned this, between traditional print media. So like when I worked at McClatchy Paper, so like the Olympian and the News Tribune, you'd write a story and then you'd send it to an editor and then the editor edits and they're going to send it over to this person and sort of everybody gets their hands on it and does different things. And what we do in my room is I I see this as an interesting story, I'm going to post it on our site. Do I want to send push notifications to people? Do I want to send them to just some people? Do I want to set them proximity alerts so that I'm alerting people around the story but not anybody else? Do I want it on Twitter? We got 8.5 million Twitter followers, so is it big enough for that? Is it big enough for Facebook? How about Tumblr or Google+? And I do all of those. There's no me sending it off to somebody else. It's me deciding, and there's no editorial process, which, well, I shouldn't say editorial. I'm the editorial process, but I'm not sending this up a food chain. It's like, oh, what do I think people need to know about this, and I'm doing this right here. I might, if there's people around, I might ask them for help with wording or if their opinion on something like that. But it's not like a required chain of events to make it happen, which is why we're fast, but I'm doing all of it. There's not a hierarchy. And from talking to Dan, I'll let him speak for himself, but I know that a lot of that is similar. It's not like the old days where somebody would, you're the reporter, you put words on a page, and then you give it to somebody else, and you just pat yourself on the head and go back to doing something else. That's really deteriorated, and it's become, you have to do it on your own.
How is social media a part of the PI's overall push?
We have a dedicated social media editor who works in our newsroom. So her job, she does a very little bit of content production, but mostly she is posting to Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and using different tools to post throughout the day. Many posts every hour, and then I post through my own social media channels, and then sometimes, if there's a breaking story or something, I might say, hey, I'm just going to push this out to social myself, so I would use the Seattle PI social channels. If it's a weekend, I frequently do that. And then sometimes whoever is producing the site, which is essentially the editor on duty, might use the social media channels. But it's a huge part of what we do, and it's a huge part of where we generate traffic. And we analyze how much traffic comes from social media and what kind of impact that does for our content. So it's a big part of what we do.
You mentioned earlier that you are paying attention to where the traffic is coming from, that you are aware of how that impacts the company. Do you care where someone interacts with the content? If they're in the Facebook environment and they're happy in the Facebook environment, do you try and give them a PI experience in Facebook, or do you try and drive them to pi.com?
We do some native Facebook content. Sometimes we'll do some videos that are just to Facebook that don't exist on our website. Sometimes we'll do some posts with like a photo. We have our Vintage Washington, Seattle PI, Instagram, and Twitter feeds that are just sometimes they'll link to a story, but mostly they're just like a cool old photo and a caption just to get people interested. I don't know that we're trying to push, I mean, we want people to come to our website, so we will give them as much as we can on Facebook and try to get them over. A lot of people interact strictly through Facebook. They find a PI link there and they click on it, they never go to our homepage. So, you know, it's worth knowing, like, okay, when we write about this, we get a lot of traffic from Facebook, so we definitely want to make sure this gets out to social right away.
Yeah, that's a big difference between their social media use and ours, is because they're creating the content most of the time. I don't want to say that there's more value, but like you can get a lot more bang for your buck by putting something on that Seattle PI can put on their social media account. If we're doing it, I mean, realistically, we're an aggregator, so we didn't write the story. So somebody's already written the story. So if I'm putting it out there, I'm just another means of putting it out there. And everything that makes us great, which is fast, is really built into our app. It's not so much into our social media. So I think we view our social media as sort of an important aspect, but it's not where we're going to try to differentiate ourselves. At least in my perspective. I'm not speaking for breaking news today, I'm just speaking for myself. But that's the way I view it, is we're not trying to focus entirely on getting our content on that, because we didn't create the content.
So I want to make sure that we have time to touch on some of these other subject areas. And while we have been talking about key challenges, I think as we're talking about the key differences between print and digital, I really want to have your perspective, since both of you, I think I would say, in your relatively young careers, both of you have seen the cycle. You have worked in print, you're working in digital. So from where you are now and the experiences that you've had in your career so far, what do you see in terms of the challenges that you're facing now to get the outcomes that your products are looking for, your companies are looking for, and the future? Where do you see this going? Since you've been in print, you've worked through some of the cycle, where do you see the future going? So let's talk about challenges that are today, and then where you see challenges moving forward, based on whatever perspective you've got from breakingnews.com or PI.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is how do you keep paying to produce a product, and I mean, how do you make money? There's, you know, print papers will not hesitate to admit that they rely heavily on print advertising. It's worth a lot more than digital advertising. Digital advertising makes up a very small percentage of the revenue that print newspapers generate, no matter how big their web presence is. The Seattle Times is a great example, and I think in this letter they just sent out yesterday, they point out how, what is it, 80% of their revenue still comes from print advertising. So they need to sell a print product to keep producing what they do. And when you look at the PI, we had about 160 staffers when we had a print paper in 2009, and we laid off 140, and now we have you know, a dozen in editorial and then some salespeople. So we couldn't keep having a big news production organization without selling that print advertising. So the biggest challenge is how do you get people to come to your site, to click on your articles, to engage, to, you know, to drive that ad content, or that, you know, those ad buys. Mm-hmm. And how do you get that up to a level where you can produce news that you consider doing the job of journalism?
Right.
Yeah, it would be easy to just say ditto. All of that. I got to give my company a lot of credit, because the focus on how to make money that a lot of digital media focuses on, they take care of. And they sort of push me out there and say, you find news and post it. And don't worry about this. We'll take care of that part, which when I'm working, I really appreciate that, because it allows me to just focus on one specific aspect. That said, I can't imagine that it's not a big concern. Like, I'm sure they're all sitting in offices trying to figure out, how do we make more money? How do we do this? But Also, another aspect of challenges going on in the future, I think, is the changing ways of, we'll use government as an example, the way that reporters used to get information. So, for example, a government reporter maybe once upon a time had sources that would bring them stories, or they could have a question and go seek out somebody's spokesman and get an answer. Sources' willingness to share that information is getting less and less and less. You're seeing more reliance on unnamed sources. You're seeing more reliance on press releases and people just not talking. They're like, well, we don't have to talk, so we're just not gonna. And my feeling, and again, I haven't been in this industry for that long, but I feel like that's getting worse. And that's a big concern to me for when it comes to challenging in the future. And that's not so much a challenge just for online media, but I think since online media and digital media is where everything's going to end up anyway. I mean, does anybody really expect print media to like be the main source of news? Nobody does. So.
Well, that's a challenge too, because all the news organizations are shrinking, and when you have fewer journalists knocking on your door or sitting in the viewing area or showing up to community meetings, then as a government official or whatever you might be, you might get the idea that you don't have to deal with them anymore. And so I think that, that challenge is compounded by a shrinking number of reporters in the field, and that's because there's not making enough money to keep us all working. So.
Yeah, I always find it like interesting when I'll post something on my own personal Facebook, and I'll have somebody say like why is the media covering X, Y, or Z? And oftentimes they are, which makes me laugh a little bit because I'm like, well, you knew about it, so they are. But when there's a chance when they're not, I wonder if the average consumer of news realize that the reporter that's doing whatever story, they only have so many hours in a day, and they have a whole lot of stories to choose from. So you kind of have to pick and choose, and stuff's going to start getting missed. And just comes down to manpower.
Every day.
Like every day, you can see newspapers laying people off. And it's everywhere. The Halifax, there's a newspaper in Nova Scotia there that, I think it's a Herald Chronicle or something like that. Anyway, they had some writers, reporters and staff, go on strike and they got fired. I doubt they're going to replace all of those. So that's paper with less people on the ground. The Chicago, was it the Sun? Let loose a bunch of photographers. Like everywhere you look, there's papers that are contracting and shedding off some staff, but they're not hiring them back, and those people aren't necessarily going on to other media fields. So you got a shrinking field of reporters, and in my opinion, a growing number of stories.
So to that point, yeah, how much time do we have, Larry, for questions and stuff?
Larry, you have about 10 minutes left.
For the whole thing? Okay.
No.
So we probably should get to questions then, I think.
I still have 2 more. Yeah,
I-
ask your questions, and if they're, don't raise their hands.
I want to make sure we do have enough time for questions. If you guys don't have any questions, we'll continue
And
talking.
let me mention that anyone who has questions, we've got a couple people with microphones. Raise your hand and you can ask your own question. Or if you prefer to write your question on the card, do so and raise the card and we will come around and collect it. Jim?
We got one right here in the middle. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm wondering, in the digital age, how important is it to maintain a personal online presence? So maintaining your own Instagram account or running your own blog or something like that in conjunction with your work, your office work.
It's huge. It's absolutely imperative. If you want to be in the journalism or even the communication or PR field for that matter, having a big online presence is invaluable. And for that matter, I would say that even trying to, I hate to say brand yourself because I kind of hate that term, but a lot of people who work in digital only are trying to brand themselves and trying to, develop this is what I do and this is how I do it, and draw an audience of unique followers because of the way they do it. And that's part of that package. Like, you know, I follow Jimmy on Facebook for 6 years now, and I know that when I see a Jimmy post, I'm going to look at it because it's going to be either something funny or something that I'm really going to care about. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think for me, at breaking news, I honestly don't think it's particularly important because, well, for a variety of reasons. But I think, like, I don't think that any of our users are just sitting at home like, what does Jimmy think on Twitter? I mean, it's just not happening. They might be looking at our Twitter account, but they're not really looking at me. So I don't think that's a particular issue for my current employment. For my health in the industry, I think it's important. Having people know who you are, know your name is important, just as an industry thing. When I was working, for example, for Reuters, or when I was covering breaking news, I thought it was way more important because having people get access to your stories and sort of, I like with Dan, I hate the phrase branding, but it sounds so cheesy. But yeah, I do think it's actually pretty important. Yeah. And it becomes much more important if you're a beat reporter than if you're an aggregator.
Great, got a question back here.
Hi, my question is, you guys were just discussing how print is going the way of the dinosaur. But realistically, other than the paper production, all those positions are still needed. You know, reporting, writers, editors, photographers. Why are we seeing such a shrink when we know that those services and the tasks are still required, even though the industry is going away from a print medium to an online medium?
This is the price, really. Like,
Yeah.
if you go, call up the Times and see how much it costs to run an ad. It's not a cheap proposition. It'll cost you some money. When it comes to online media, I don't think just the money's not there. I mean, the same article, like if you had a newspaper and it has three, like one page of the newspaper might have X number of articles or something. And you might have an ad on there. The amount of money that they're paying for that particular ad versus how many eyeballs that are going to get pushed onto it is really skewed from what same thing would happen if it was online. I mean, online ads are just, they don't generate near the kind of money. So I don't know how much Seattle Times makes per reader.
Is that due to conversion?
I'm not really sure.
Because I worked in directory sales for a while.
Yeah, I've never had anything to do with it. I couldn't tell you why. I just know that my gut, I shouldn't say I know, my gut instinct tells me that the dollars that they pay per eyeball on an ad is much higher than the online version.
Yeah, and I mean, I've watched it firsthand in 2 print papers that struggled to have an online presence. And the reality is we just do more with less. You know, at the PI, we're trying to cover Seattle and the Seattle metropolitan area and Washington State, and we have a political reporter who covers national politics. And we do that with, you know, a fraction of the staff that we once had. And so, you know, this is, and I'm not saying that that's what should happen. I think we should have more people to do more, but, you know, they just can't pay for it. And, you know, until they figure out a way to either make more money or get people to work for less, then, which they're doing also, by the way. So, I mean, that's the reality. So you're going to continue to see layoffs at print papers, and you're going to see organizations shrink, and they're going to figure out a way to survive. And, you know, a lot of people don't give us a lot of credit for what we do because they say, oh, you know, they do a bunch of galleries, or they have these pop-up ads that really, you know, piss me off, and I don't like that. And, you know, that's why you get it for free. So, you know, there's nothing, I mean, that's just the nature of the industry these days.
I was thinking for like something you said that made me think of this is the contraction and the growth cycle. I feel like I can't answer that particularly honestly because we are, I don't know if we're a statistical outlier, but our growth last year was about 96% on users, which that doesn't exist in any other thing. But I don't know how that correlates to money. I'm out of the loop on that one, so I don't really know what that means. I just know that when I look at traditional media, they're not having that kind of growth.
Another question in the back?
Oh,
I'll just say it because somebody else has got the card and my question's not happening. But it's timely with what's being discussed here. So, for example, I know a lot of people that have in the media who lost their jobs, who are very seasoned.
Yeah.
Probably way more seasoned than some of you, no discredit.
almost guaranteed.
Yeah, but they've, in the course of getting seasoned, they also helped, like I can think of one in particular who was an editor for the Washington Times and the Houston Chronicle, and these people have put their entire lives into those careers because it's that type of career, and it has been in the evolution of that, and only to help papers go online, learn social media, and then get fired, basically. Or, basically they didn't do anything wrong, but their position was dissolved or
Too expensive.
some sort of diplomatic word for, yeah, you're canned, basically. Now, there's only so many academia positions, which is the next place that some of those people go. And this one particular friend has done that, but they can get one-year positions in a special chair situation, and it's terribly trying, but the value of these people is incredible. And so I'm wondering, what do you see as far as what positions can they apply for now that are sort of revolutionary things? We constantly are coming up with careers that never existed before because technology is doing that. So what can you possibly see or imagine that could evolve to where those people can be used? Because not everybody is online all the time. That's assuming that everybody has a technical job. I mean, your growth may go 90 to 96%. That does not mean it's 96% of the population by any means. So I'm just wondering, what's your, where do you think those people can be valuable now, and what sort of jobs and technology or growth in the industry do you see possibly happening for the future?
Well, the one thing, one of my coworkers is Tom Brew, and we were talking about his time in the media, and he started in the 70s, and he was saying when he started, he had a typewriter. It wasn't even electronic; it was a manual typewriter, and he got excited because right after he started, after a little while, then they got electronic typewriters, and then they got a computer, and he's sort of moved his way up, and now he works for, a digital media company that's kind of like a trendsetter, I guess, if you will. So they exist. There are people that are making that transition. What you said, though, really, that's one thing that worries me. You have a lot of people out there that are leaving traditional media with an incredible amount of knowledge. A lot of institutional knowledge is one thing, but just knowledge in general that society could benefit from, and they're not finding homes in media. They're going to other things. So I guess, from a personal standpoint, it makes me happy that they're landing somewhere, but it makes me a little concerned as a society that all of that knowledge is just sort of evaporating. And I honestly don't know where that goes. I think if I did, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
We got one question up here in the front. Yep.
So how does the media affect the international events, and how do you choose the stories that are interesting, and how do you validate those stories? Like if they're in Yugoslavia or Austria or something.
So can I prompt you to tell your Australia story?
If I remembered the Australia story.
When does Australia show up on
Oh, yeah,
breakingnews.com?
So, when I'm working tonight, right about 5 o'clock, I'm going to start following news coming out of Australia a little more because everybody in Australia is waking up, and they were asleep before, so they're not going to be on there. But for verifying news stories and deciding what to pick, I'm not going to lie, it's a heck of a lot easier if it's an English-based system, or if it's on Associated Press reporter, or they have a government official saying it, somebody I can cite, and I can have some faith in. If it's not that, then it's just old school. I would reporting digging. Okay, who is saying this? Who it is? Who's this newspaper? that's reporting this, because I'm not up on all the news services in Yugoslavia or something like that. So it just comes to digging and trying to find out who's reporting it, who they are, and can I trust them? And that's just news judgment, which is why I don't think there's a huge difference between reporting that's getting done online versus traditional. It was the same way, like, how can you trust this person? The guy on the ground in Yugoslavia is doing the same thing I'm doing. He's just...
I would say for us, an international story, and I very rarely will touch on an international story personally, but as an organization, if it's a big story, then we're going to grab it. It's going to go up on the homepage. But it's a matter of, like, if everyone in the newsroom says, hey, did you look at that thing on CNN, or did you see this thing, or did you hear about this? That's something that we're going to definitely get. It's going to be like a breaking news alert on our homepage. Otherwise, it might just go into the international news homepage, on our site. So, and it's the same thing. I mean, we're going to use AP feeds or Reuters stories, or sometimes our other Hearst properties might have a reporter who actually goes somewhere, rarely, and so then we're going to grab that story. So.
Still digging.
Are we done?
Yeah,
Need to wrap
we've
up?
run out of time, and I hope everyone has enjoyed the discussion. And please join me in giving these great folks another round of applause.